My name is Zoë Chan. I'm the Richmond Art Gallery curator, and I'm the curator of the exhibition, The Chromophiliacs. The Chromophiliacs uses the book Chromophobia by David Batchelor. His thesis is basically that color has been historically marginalized in Euro-American, Euro-Canadian culture and art history and literature. He says that color is commonly associated with the primitive. It's often othered as, feminine and frivolous and not serious. And I was interested in that idea and how it's manifesting today. And I also wanted to put together an exhibition that responds to that in a playful and colorful and exciting way, but also in a way that shows that color can be used in a range of ways. And, the artists that I've invited are using color to address a range of issues that are serious, including, war, the impacts of colonization, thinking through the queer lens. So really, color is something that isn't frivolous. It's quite the opposite. And I hope this exhibition embodies that idea. When people walk into the gallery, they'll see this beautiful title wall by Yaimel López Zaldívar. Yaimel is originally from Cuba, and he's a designer and illustrator. So he brings a really strong graphic pop culture focus to the exhibition. What I liked about when I asked him to come up with a wall design, he basically made a design that reminds me of, like a title sequence in a superheroes movie. It has a strong comic book aesthetic. There's a feeling of movement and excitement. And I love the idea that he's, created this kind of persona for the Chromophiliacs, the artists who are part of this exhibition. And he is also a featured artist in the exhibition. He made an artist book called Ciudad, which means city in Spanish. And he's made this really interesting, very colorful book that can be opened and closed in a variety of different ways. He's also experimenting with sculpture and architecture, much like what you might find in a city which is in constant change. Osvaldo Ramirez Castillo is originally from El Salvador, and he came to Canada to escape the civil war there that was going on in the 1980s. So war, the traumas of war, the impacts of war has really played a huge part of his practice. These are beautiful, delicate, incredibly detailed drawing and collages. It's hard to see, but they're actually collages. His style is a kind of mashup of influences ranging from, of course, surrealism, but also tattoos, botanical drawings, pre-Columbian iconography. And more recently, we can see a strong presence of plant life. So there's this feeling that maybe that's the influence of living in BC for the last few years, perhaps, or maybe, the possibility for change and transformation. Laura Meza Orozco is a Mexican artist. Her works are weavings in the exhibition. Laura is a queer artist and has created this manifesto, which she calls Queer Utopia, which is also part of a larger body of work that she's been working on. Her work often combines bodies with landscapes, flora, and blooms coming together. So I think there's just beautiful interplay of body parts, but also plant life. And she's sort of imagining this future where we live respectfully with the environment and have time to celebrate together. Malina Sintnicolaas is another local artist. She has been working with hyperbolic crochet. I love her installations, these soft sculptures. They really feel like they're like bursting out of not their skin, but she works with these very lush red colors that evoke blood, but also flowers. And I think they have a kind of a dark energy to them. She describes them as a kind of embodiment of her experience as a queer person who lives with post-traumatic stress disorder and a hidden disability. They have this haunting energy, but they also are just also delightful. Maru Aponte is a Puerto Rican artist who works with the tradition of plein air painting, but instead of from a European perspective, she's coming, of course, from a Caribbean lens. So she often starts with, she'll be on the beach in a little chair and she'll make these little landscapes on these small pieces of paper and then expand them into larger scale drawings, or she's been making these kind of standalone sculptures. You'll notice that the one in the gallery, we have a curving stand-up sculpture that curves through the gallery. She calls it like, you're at eye level of her little beach chair where she's kind of sunk into the sand. So it doesn't go very high and she's very close to the birds, and it's just this beautiful, fluid, tropical landscape. And I think one thing, when I think of watercolors, I often think of very pale, light colors, but these are like very pigmented, very saturated colors. And I think that really makes her work sort of stand out. Sandeep Johal is known for her murals and her, what she calls an Indian folk art aesthetic. For this exhibition, she wanted to explore the idea of the vanitas, which is a European painting genre. And usually each object has a specific symbol related to life's fleeting nature, how we always live close to death, and how ephemeral life is. So often there'll be a skull representing death, which is what she has in her work, or the candle, which represents the soul. She's decided to recreate the vanitas tradition, but using soft sculpture. There's lots of little clues to her own life throughout the vanitas. So they're the presence of marigolds, they're snapdragons that her mother likes to grow in her garden. There's a hand there with a broken finger. She has a broken finger. So these kind of little hints and clues into her personal life. She's described this project as an artist who, as she grows older, she's becoming aware of her own mortality and thinking about her own parents' mortality also. I think often her work has this playful exterior, but often with this darker undertones. Moozhan Ahmadzadegan is an Iranian-Canadian artist. His work is playing with the aesthetic art history of Iran, including Persian miniatures, carpets, and architecture. And you can see that throughout his prints and sculptures in the gallery. He, for example, has a series of prints where he's kind of pastiching the tradition of Persian miniature painting, but he's using, quite bright colors in comparison to what would have been the originals. And then also imagining a democratic Iran where it would be popular, for example, to have Ruth Paul's Drag Race set in Iran, for example. So there's this kind of playful imagining, which makes his work very poignant, especially given the current state of affairs in Iran right now. Jan Wade is a Black Canadian artist, originally from Hamilton, but she's been living in Vancouver since the 80s. She has this stunning Breathe series that she's been making since 2004. It's these embroidered pieces that she would actually make at home instead of the delicate embroidery that we might imagine of flowers or cute scenes that we might associate with this type of needlework. She's creating these beautiful, bright rectangles and stripes, so has more of a feeling of a patchwork blanket or an abstract painting. She presents them in this really long line across the gallery, and so this idea, as the title suggests, breathe, this idea of a breath that flows through an individual's life, the breath that might come from your ancestors and into the present. So it's this very powerful work, and I'm incredibly honored to show it. She's also showing a few of her assemblages that are inspired by African memory jugs, which could be considered like a kind of memento mori or a gravestone marker where you would have a jug and it would be attached with things that had significance for that person's life. She's created these fragile-looking sculptures out of African carvings, ceramic jars, toys, buttons, all kinds of knickknacks, and they all kind of represent different aspects of Black diasporic culture, politics, and also just her own specific visual language. Diyan Achjadi is an Indonesian-Canadian artist who lives in Vancouver. She was trained as a printmaker. So she has a series here called Mooi Java, which signifies beautiful Java in Dutch. The Mooi Java was a kind of artistic painting genre of Dutch paintings during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, which was developed by the Dutch settlers to promote investment there. So this very romantic depiction of Java. So what she's presenting is a response to that. She's reworking this genre. So instead of showing, these tranquil landscapes that you would find in the original Mooi Java, you can see palm trees in a storm, there's an explosion. And so she's making reference to signs of unrest that would have taken place during the colonialist occupation of Java by the Dutch. Diyan also is presenting some kind of sculptures or books, as she sometimes calls them, where she's, instead of printmaking, she's now painting onto both sides of sheets and presenting it either on the wall or on a plinth. She's playing with traditional narrative structures and creating a more open-ended and deconstructed way of thinking about storytelling. These two on the wall here, a ghost of a tree remains, and there was once a mango tree on Jupiter. These were made during the pandemic when she was thinking about a mango tree that was near her sister's house in Jakarta. Charlene Vickers is an artist of Anishinaabe descent. She's been living in Vancouver since the 90s. She's very influenced by the ovoid form, which can be found in the West Coast. I love these felt ovoids that she's been making since 2017. Each one is really like its own little character. But what I really think it shows too is just mastery of color. This installation of felt ovoids is really almost like a class in thinking about color theory and what colors look like next to each other and how they change when they're next to each other. And I think it's just a beautiful, joyful installation.